Hey everyone, welcome to this MTZ Insiders exclusive video on the Age of Aquarius, or should I say the Age of Pisces. So very important topic. We hear a lot about the Age of Aquarius and everyone says we've entered into the Age of Aquarius, but the truth is actually we haven't, at least not yet. So in this video, we're going to talk about what age we're in, which is the age of Pisces, actually, and how long we'll be in Pisces, and when did this shift really take place when we entered Pisces, and when will we enter Aquarius? So let's go and take a look here at this chart. I've simplified the chart here, so we're only looking at the sun, because first of all, we do have to define what is an age, right? So what are people talking about when they say that we're in the age of Aquarius or the age of whatever it might be? And what they're referencing is it's the constellation that the sun is in when it's the spring equinox, okay? So on the spring equinox, where's the sun? If it's in the age of Pisces, then technically, by definition, we're in the age of Pisces, and that's exactly where the sun is during the spring equinox. So this chart here is showing the spring equinox for 2020, and the exact time of that was the 29th of March at 23:49 Eastern time, and this signifies where the sun was. So as you can see here, using the actual size of the constellations, the sun was in Pisces, and the sun will be in Pisces for every spring equinox until it gets to Aquarius, which we'll do the calculations, but just to give you a bit of a sneak peek into what it is, it's actually a very long ways away. We're talking about 750 years. So in about 750 years, when it is the spring equinox, we will see the sun starting to enter into the actual constellation of Aquarius. So it's very important to know this because, the age does symbolize what we are learning collectively during the time period, and it shows a lot of collective energy. So both how we can work with the energy is important, which in this case we're working with Pisces right now, which is about greater receptivity. It's about spiritual development. It's about finding wholeness and peace in life, right? This is the collective theme and has been for a very long time. So let's go and do some quick math here in terms of when did we actually enter into this age of Pisces, and so that we can see the contrast between what was Pisces and what was Aries before then, because before Pisces we were in the age of Aries. And as you can see here, everything's moving backwards in the chart, right? Normally the planets would be moving in this sort of counterclockwise fashion. But when we're looking at the precession, which is when the sun is moving relative to the constellations every year, we can see that it does move backwards. That's why we're going this way in the chart, and that's why we move from Aries to Pisces to Aquarius. So let's go and define precession. So why is the sun changing? Why is it that every spring equinox the sun is not in the same exact place in the sky every year? Why is it moving in this clockwise fashion along the zodiac? And that's because of what they call precession. And the mainstream definition of precession is that the Earth is doing this kind of wobbling effect. And it's a very, very slow wobble. Just to put it into perspective, it takes roughly 25,800 years or 26,000 years for the Earth to do one full wobble, right? And so this sort of wobbling effect is what creates the changing of the sun every year, or just slightly every day, right? It's just barely moving. We're talking 26,000 years for the sun, relative to the constellations to do one full rotation. And so every roughly 72 years, or more precisely, once every 71.6 years, the sun will move 1 degree relative to the stars every year. So in other words, on the spring equinox of every year, or let's put it this way, in the spring equinox of every 72 years, the sun will move 1 degree of a constellation, or relative to the stars. So 1 degree every 72 or 71.6 years, the sun is moving. And this is why we're using sidereal. So for those of you who know, we are using the actual size of the constellations here, with Mastering the Zodiac and with the YouTube channel. And this is different from mainstream astrology, because mainstream astrology in the West does not account for precession. They are using a fixed system, which says that every spring equinox, the sun is at 0 degrees Aries. But the sun isn't actually at 0 degrees Aries every spring. It's actually moving. And when Western astrology really got popular, it was when the sun was at roughly around 0 degrees Aries. So what happened around this time period, which was around 200 AD, the West pretty much adopted this seasonal system of, fixing the sun and the planets to the seasons and just changing the chart completely and saying, okay, at spring, during the spring equinox, the sun is at 0 degrees Aries, when in fact it's not. And you can see how much it's changed since that roughly 200 AD time period when we started to fix the planets around the seasons. It's changed drastically, right? We're talking about thousands of years. And so this is how much the sun has moved since the around 0 AD time period, when things were more relative to the sky, because at that time, around 0 AD, the sun was close to 0 degrees Aries. And so it made sense at the time to just fix everything around the seasons to make it easier. So instead of having to do all these mathematical calculations, which we're really only able to do so precisely because of computers now, back then, the easiest way to do it was just say, okay, let's just make it simple. And right at the spring equinox of every year, the sun will be at 0 degrees Aries, and we'll calculate the chart around that. So that's what Western astrology is still using, right? They're still using this seasonal system, which unfortunately does not reflect the actual sky. And in this case, now that we have computers, we're able to calculate this exact precession. And again, we can see here that the sun is actually in Pisces during spring right now. That's why all the signs are different in sidereal. So this is very important that we look at the actual locations here for, of course, calculating the age that we're in. And so in this case, it's definitely the age of Pisces. So if you were to go look up at the sky during the spring equinox, you would see the sun, assuming you were using a telescope, one for daylight, you would see the sun in Pisces at this time. So when did the sun shift into Pisces? And so if we do the math, so we know that there's this roughly 26,000 year rotation of this so-called wobble. Now it's very debatable as to whether it's actually a wobble. There's, in my opinion, a theory that makes more sense, which is that we're actually part of a binary star system, which is causing this precession, this slight change of the planets relative to the constellation. So I don't think it's the Earth that's wobbling. I think what it is, it's the entire solar system that is actually moving relative to the stars. But anyways, it's not important specifically for knowing what age we're in, because like I was saying, you can just go look up at the sky and see where the sun is during the spring equinox. But let's go and take a look at the time. So if we do the math, so roughly 25,800 years for the full rotation. That equals roughly about 71.6 degrees a year, like we were saying. So every roughly 72 years, the sun will move 2 degrees. So if we do the math and we subtract back to when the sun was right in between Aries and Pisces, we can see that this was around the time of around 230, 240 BC. Okay. So around 235 BC. And so this is a very significant time, because if you look at the time prior to that, it was very Aries oriented. It was very much about action and initiative. And in like countries, there was a lot of war and fighting and claiming land and ownership, right? All these things that are Aries, which is very much about self-interested energy, right? And very ego type of energy, and that kind of more assertive, direct theme of life, needing that. But since then, as we've started to move into this new age of Pisces, we've noticed a complete contrast to that. Obviously, we've still had wars and stuff, but it wasn't so much about dominance. It wasn't so much about ego and personal needs, which was the case, very much prior to that, especially in the West. What started to happen once we entered the age of Pisces is the most notable, among other things, is we started to enter into very religious time periods, particularly with Christianity, right? So as we started to get into, 0 AD and after that, we really started to see the Pisces influence, especially during the Dark Ages in Europe, and then leading into, the later ages that, of course, we're still in with Pisces. But so that's been the theme, right? Since then, since around this 235 BC time period, we've definitely collectively seen more of this importance of developing greater peace, greater receptivity, the ideas of Christianity around compassion, heart-centeredness, really surrendering and trusting in God or the divine process, right? And compassion and all this kind of more watery Pisces stuff, which is what Pisces symbolizes, is all of this, finding of more wholeness and peace in life. And it's very spiritual. So that is the theme. That is still where we're at. We are still very much in this collective time of developing greater spirituality and greater receptivity and peace. And so it's very important to note that. So why is it that we're seeing so much of this Age of Aquarius talk? And why have we seen so much technological innovation this past roughly 100 or so years? And the answer to that is the sun has actually started to move into the 11th house relative to the precession. So in other words, if we divide up the chart into equal houses, and so houses just represent the portions of the sky that you can divide up. And in astrology, we use these different houses to see where everything's at in the sky. And there's different house systems, but I personally use the equal house system, which is using an even 30 degrees to divide up the sky, just to help keep things as if you were looking at them in the sky. So in other words, the 9th house and 10th house, the top of the chart is literally the highest part of the ecliptic, or where the planets move in the sky. So the highest part of the sky and the highest part of the chart. So it basically just divides up the sky into 12 equal parts. So what we can see here is that the sun has entered into the 11th house relative to the beginning of the zodiac for roughly about 1.5 degrees. So if we do the math, if it's roughly every 71.6 years that the sun's moving, times this 1.5 degrees, we can see that it was roughly around 1910, 1915, 1920, but leading into the 1900s, basically, that the sun started to enter into the 11th house. And guess what? That's exactly when we had huge technological innovations. We entered into the industrial age. We really started to get into technology and innovative things. And that is what the 11th house represents. That is also what Aquarius represents, right? Aquarius is associated with the 11th house. They're about the same thing. But the difference here is that we're not in Aquarius, we're in Pisces. We're just in the 11th house, which is dealing with themes around Aquarian type of things like technology, innovation, all this stuff that is very visionary, very progressive, and innovative in nature. So that's certainly the case. And we've just entered into it, and we've got a long ways to go with the 11th house. Again, many years, 1 degree every 72 years. But the important thing here is to note that it's 11th house and Pisces, not 11th house and Aquarius, right? So it's still about peace and receptivity and finding wholeness in life, right? It's just through the technological area, through Aquarius's house, which rules things like tech, innovation, progressiveness, visionary energy, collective energies, global stuff, things of that nature. But you can see the strong, correlation here. When you're using the actual size of the constellations, you can see how accurate this is. Going into, the new, millennium, after the age of Aries, going into Pisces, we saw huge Pisces influence we hadn't seen during the age of Aries. And, and that's, definitely been the theme of finding more spiritual peace and wholeness, during this age of Pisces, and will be continuing to move forward. So how much time do we have? Around 752 years, if you do the math. So if you do those degrees, the sun will move 1 degree every 72 years. In roughly 750 years, the sun will then get in between Pisces and Aquarius, and then slowly start to move into Aquarius. So for those of you who, have thought we've been in the age of Aquarius, actually not quite yet. We're certainly in the 11th house, but that's a little bit different. It's important to recognize that we are still in the age of Pisces and to develop these receptive qualities of Pisces. And when the sun actually does enter Aquarius, that will likely be a very progressive time. And, that will then be a good time to embody more of the visionary side of ourself, and progressive and innovative and healthfully disrupting the status quo, inducing more freedom, right? And things like that. It'll still be about tech, innovative stuff while the sun's in the 11th house, but it'll be about developing our visionary side, our innovative side, our eccentricities, uniqueness, inducing change, more personally in that sense. But right now, it's definitely about greater receptivity. All right, so I hope this video cleared things up, because it's very important, like I said, to know which age we're in. And there's a lot of confusion out there about whether we're in the age of Pisces or not. And if you look up at the actual sky, which is what this chart represents, it's pretty straightforward. We're definitely in the age of Pisces, not even close to Aquarius. We are in the 11th house, which is why we've seen so much progressive energy. But very important time to develop Pisces energy. Pisces, the fish, is about, two fish swimming in opposite directions, but yet they're connected to a singular point. And that singular point is Pisces, which is, finding spiritual peace, connecting with God, if you believe in that, or in the present moment, or to source, and really connecting to that essence, which is what we're all coming from and always connected to in the now moment. So great time of really developing this energy collectively. All right, so I hope this video was helpful. Hope it clears some things up, and I'll see you all in the next MTZ Insiders video. Take care.